Good morning, my name is Rachel Carrión, and I'm here today to talk to you about my experience with the New York juvenile justice system. Thank you for this chance to tell my story. When I arrived on the center, the campus, I walked into just violence amongst the residents, the peers, violence amongst the staff members and the residents. You know, it was really bad. I witnessed girls beating up each other and being sent to ICU, staff members physically fighting, like not restraining, but fighting the youth to, I guess, try to keep them in control. Other incidents where I would try to leave the facility that I was in. I would try to go outside, and staff members would grab me by my hair and slam me to the floor. I'm sure that wasn't the protocol.
It's been over 2 years since the Blue Ribbon Governance Task Force, chaired by John Jay College President Jeremy Travis, concluded that New York's system of juvenile justice was badly broken. That wasn't news to a lot of people in the system, including the young people who are confined in it. There were chilling reports of physical abuse in upstate detention facilities. Kids could be severely punished for merely laughing too much or for looking at a staff member the wrong way. Young people detained for minor crimes could find themselves in the same lockup as the most violent and dangerous youth offenders. Mental health care was almost non-existent. Worse, the system was failing in its primary mission, keeping troubled kids out of trouble. Nearly 90% of boys and 81% of girls in the system had been rearrested by age 28. Since the December 2009 task force report, the state has been deeply engaged in trying to put things right. More than a dozen youth residences have closed. Psychiatrists have been hired, and the number of kids held in custody has been sharply reduced. The next phase of the overhaul begins this month. Legislators in Albany are examining a proposal by Governor Andrew Cuomo to transfer young offenders in upstate facilities closer to their home communities in New York City. So, are we finally returning justice to New York's juvenile justice system? I'm Steve Handelman. Today on Criminal Justice Matters, we've invited one of the key players in that system to help us answer that question. My special guest is Gladys Carrión, New York State Commissioner for the Office of Children and Family Services, OCFS. Ms. Carrión, born and raised in the South Bronx, educated at Fordham and NYU Law School, and a longtime community activist, was first appointed in 2007 by Governor Eliot Spitzer. She's been at the epicenter of New York's juvenile justice reform debate ever since, attracting admiration, awards, and controversy. One upstate legislator, George Maziarz, even called her the most dangerous person in New York State government. So, Commissioner Carrión, welcome to Criminal Justice Matters.
Thank you.
Let's start with the basics. How does a kid get into the juvenile justice system today? What happens to him?
Well, a young person has to be arrested, and they're arrested, and there could be a variety of different responses from law enforcement. A young person can immediately be diverted by the police. They actually have that power and authority. They can be diverted by probation, or they can be diverted by a family court judge if it's a delinquency matter, or if they're in the state of New York, if they're 16 or over when they commit a crime, it would go into the adult criminal justice system, and a judge there could divert them. But after adjudication, there is a hearing, and if a judge decides that they're a risk to public safety, that they have committed, hopefully, a serious offense, then they would be remanded to the custody of the state of New York, and it would be my custody as Commissioner of the Office of Children and Family Services. Too often, I think one of the concerns we have in New York State and across the country is that many young people have their first encounter with the police now in our schools, and that's a real concern for us. But if they're adjudicated by a judge, they come to the state.
And who's in our facilities today?
Well, I often like to say that these young people in New York State, we continue to incarcerate too many low-risk young people that have committed low-level misdemeanor crimes. We incarcerate in New York State children that have serious mental health disorders, children that have substance abuse problems, and children that have developmental delays, children that are struggling and doing poorly in school. That really is who comprises the population in my juvenile justice system.
How many of them are violent or dangerous offenders, as people like to say, compared to
Well, you know,
your basic trouble kids?
well, you know, we have a secure system where young people who commit very serious crimes and offenses, there's what we call the very deep end of my system, which is our secure system, and that is about, and it's pretty stable the last 5 years, it's about 250 to 300 young people, and those people are in my more secure.
Out of how many?
Out of, well, currently right now, we have just about 600 young people in our system, so we have about 250 in our secure side, and I would say that about a third of those we could consider violent. When I started as commissioner, we had close to 1,400 young people in our system.
That's a significant drop.
Yes, there has been.
Is that because there are fewer kids in trouble?
Yes, I think that there are fewer kids in trouble. I think that statistics show that crime and juvenile crime is at a long time low. We also are becoming smarter about how we work with young people and understand that incarceration is not the answer to public safety, and that we need to invest more in rehabilitating young people, in diverting them, and really investing in programs that make a difference in their lives.
Let's talk a little bit about how you got there. Let me read you a paragraph from the 2009 report of the Commission, the Governor's Commission. It said then that New York's juvenile justice system is failing in its mission to nurture and care for young people in state custody. The state's punitive correctional approach has damaged the future prospects of these young people, wasted millions of taxpayer dollars, and violated the fundamental principles of positive youth development. So are we in a better place today?
We absolutely are in a better place. And that summary by the task force that the governor appointed, that was chaired by the president of John Jay, Jeremy Travis, was absolutely correct. And we started that task force to really help guide us as we had already initiated some reform. You know, when I came in as commissioner, that really was the mandate that I had, to look at our juvenile justice system and see how we could make it better. So we are in a much better place. We have right-sized the system. I have had the ability to close 18 facilities across the state.
And we now have how many?
We have 21 facilities now. We closed those 18.
That's over half. That's
yes. We've reduced substantially the number of young people coming into the system. We really have focused in ensuring and working with the judges to ensure that only truly those young people that pose a risk to public safety come into the system, that we divert those young people that really are not a risk to public safety, which is what the law says. We're implementing the law. And the judges have a requirement to really look at the less restrictive setting, and they're doing that. And we've been able to fund, in collaboration with local counties, particularly New York City, alternatives both to detention and placement. And we've been successful in working with young people and their families to divert them from the system.
So some of the criticism, which is odd, I suppose, ironic, is that you've almost gone too fast, that you've made these reforms and made these changes without taking into account, for instance, safety of staff, prison staff. It's one of the reasons why you've been on the hot seat for the last year and a half. You've been called, as I said in the opening, most dangerous person in the New York State government, and it made us wonder whether we should have security guards around you when you came in. But I mean, have you gotten through that? I mean, why has it been such an uphill climb? Why do so many northern upstate legislators say that you're just not doing the job? And at least a year ago, we're saying that this woman should be fired.
Well, you know, I think that that has been the case for the 5 years that I've been commissioner. And certainly, and it's been unfortunate with our upstate communities because there has not been at all an increase in juvenile crime, nor an increase in violent juvenile crime in the state of New York. In fact, we're doing much better. But I think that the challenge always is about really what these young people represent. And that is jobs in upstate New York. And the governor said it. Governor Cuomo said it in the state message where he said that we will no longer, as a state, incarcerate young people in order to create jobs. And unfortunately, the facilities have been economic engines in local communities. And they stepped up when no other community wanted these prisons. They stepped up and said yes. They saw that they needed to have good paying civil service jobs in their communities. I come along and start closing these facilities and eliminating jobs. I've eliminated close to 1,000 jobs.
So you're hitting their economic jugular vein.
I am.
Kind of as a reflection of what's going on in the adult system as well, with closing prisons upstate.
Exactly. And this governor in last year's budget recognized that. And he actually created an economic development fund that allows impacted communities to access resources, about $25 million, to be able to replace the loss of jobs by creating other economic incentives. And so the governor recognized that this did cost communities a lot, and there needed to be some solution. But it wasn't creating more prisons, more juvenile facilities, or sending more young people to facilities.
But is it just about economics alone? I mean, some of your critics might say, well, no, it gets to the heart of what juvenile delinquency or juvenile justice problems could represent for public safety. They're saying that we're not, even as we do our reforms, we're not keeping pace with the potential dangers some of these kids might have to public safety. And this echoes the same political debate that's going on around the country. You know, that at the start of it, we talked about super predators 10 or 15 years ago, and nobody talks about them anymore. But the politics of this issue almost overwhelms sometimes the therapeutic or criminal justice aspects, and that's obviously still a problem.
It is, you know, but I often like to say, and certainly when I'm testifying, that facts matter. And the facts do not bear out that we've had an increase in crime, that we've somehow put public safety at risk. It's just not the case. New York State is not releasing violent young predators into the community. That's not the case.
Where do we have to go from here? The governor has been proposing a new step as part of, I suppose, dealing with the recommendations of the task force, which he calls close to home, which will bring more of the young offenders back to their communities or closer to their communities. Tell us a little bit about that and how that will help us change the goalposts in juvenile justice.
Well, as you've referenced, the task force really urged us to bring young people closer to home, to work within their communities, to create capacity in local communities to serve the young people and their families. And the governor now is taking it to the next step of really allowing New York City to assume responsibility for its young people by establishing its own juvenile justice system for that low-level and medium-risk young person. Our state system is populated by New York City youth. They're about 75% of the young people that comprise the state system. Our facilities are very far away from New York City, and even though we've been closing them, we've been moving young people closer to the city. In fact, I have a pilot in Brooklyn called Brooklyn for Brooklyn, where we're keeping African-American boys primarily, because that's who is in the state prison system, juvenile justice system, in their communities. And it's building on the Missouri model. And I think that New York City has experienced much success with their alternatives to detention in keeping young people close to home, and they now want to go to the next level. And so we're working very closely with them to develop a plan that will make that happen.
Well, two questions on that. First of all, is New York City able and ready to take charge of those kids? I mean, it's one of the issues that people have raised, whether in those homes or facilities where those kids will be put, that there's still not sufficient protection or sufficient counseling, whether it's because of money or because of the capacity of people and staff to deal with the kids. I mean, do you think we're ready? Is New York City
Well, you know, we're going to do this in phases. And the first phase will be the low-level, non-secure, we call non-secure youth that comes into my system. And many of those young people are already with voluntary agencies. You know, New York State has a very privatized system, and New York City relies on voluntary agencies to provide the services. to these young people than they're doing it now. About 50%, if not more, of the young people that are involved in juvenile justice system are placed by judges into voluntary agencies. New York City will expand on that, and New York City will not be running any facilities directly. They will rely on the network of voluntary agencies. I'd like to think that the state has given them a pretty good amount of money to be able to do this and adequately resource these voluntary agencies to be able to provide the sets of services and supports that these young people need.
The last statistic I saw was that we were spending about $210,000 per kid per year in our juvenile justice system. Is that not enough or too much?
Well, we actually are spending more now. And the number continues to increase, which is one of the areas of great concern to us. So we're spending a lot of money, and it's always been my opinion, and certainly that of the governor, that we're not spending it wisely, that we're not investing it in what works. And that's what we're going to do now. We are really going to incentivize what works, work with the city to really help them create a better system that keeps young people in their community, with their families, in the local schools, with the wraparound services they need to be successful.
Now, how do we know these things work? We were speaking here at a research university where data is important, in fact, all important. And we were speaking a little bit before we went on the air about the problems of having sufficient data to tell us what works and what doesn't work. That's a real issue, isn't it, still in the field?
It is a challenge. It really is a challenge because there are very few, a handful of evidence-based programs. We, as a society, really have not invested in the research and evaluation to see what works. But we have quite a few of therapeutic. We have a handful, but I think enough, and certainly mature programs that the city and the state have invested in, evidence-based interventions that will be at the core of this reform effort. And we've seen good results. By the way,
good results meaning lower recidivism rates?
Lower recidivism, better academic outcomes, better safety outcomes, less crime, better family functioning. All very important. And, you know, young people do grow out of this behavior, and the more supports that you provide, the better that they do. And we're seeing that. There are many success stories.
I mean, a lot of the intervention ideas and theories are that the community has to play a significant role in rehabilitating these kids or getting them to the point where they get out of the system before they go further into the adult system. How does that work? How does that play out in some of the plans you're thinking about?
Well,
more community involvement.
Well, you know, we have invested very much in creating capacity in communities. And while much remains to be done, we certainly have seeded many good programs and have been supporting. And for instance, in our Brooklyn for Brooklyn initiative, we have an advisory board from the community that's involved in our work. We actually released an RFP and awarded over $1 million to community-based organizations to come and work in the facility with these young people and families so that we can do a transition from facility into the community, and young people and their families are connected to services in their community.
Does this involve churches and community groups, boys clubs? Who
Absolutely. It involves the faith-based community. It involves local community-based organizations like the Children's Aid Society, like Boys and Girls Clubs, like the Y, like the Brooklyn Children's Museum, Medgar Evers College, and you know, it's the same philosophy that the city is employing as it develops its plan.
The problem is we still don't know what works. We know, I assume, what doesn't work. The punitive model, which is what the 2009 report lashed out against, is over. It's been over since the 1990s. What are the other models of how to treat kids? We've been sort of dancing around that, but give us sort of in a point form the various kinds of, the alternative kinds of treatment. We're talking about the alternatives to detention, or once you're in detention, difference in the way you actually handle these kids.
Well,
tell us what some of those different alternatives are.
There are alternatives. Many of them really involved changing behavior, working with the children and the families in a therapeutic setting or providing therapy. And there are some very well-tested models, multisystemic therapy. They're
What's that?
Family functionally. You know, it's an approach. It's a way of really involving the young person and defining what their problems are and looking at the trauma that they've experienced in their lives. What are the triggers to behavior? And giving them the tools to manage their behavior, providing them alternatives for better behavior, understanding the rewards and the consequences, of assisting them of getting into the right school where they will be successful, providing their families with the tools to learn how to nurture their child, how to manage behavior, how to deal, it might be how to deal with their psychological problems, providing them with the mental health supports they need. If it's substance abuse problems, providing them with substance abuse services. And also tying them to the normative types of activities that all adolescents should be engaged in, so that they have the sports. I speak to young people often, and I tell them, what would have made a difference for you? Instead of coming into my system, what would have made a difference? And they say, school, right? They always mention school. I didn't feel good in school. They didn't want me there. I wasn't doing well. No one paid attention to me. Or they were saying there weren't sports. There was nothing for me to do. My mother was working, I have 5 siblings, and I was just hanging out. There weren't any sports, there wasn't a youth club. We need more activities in the community, and that's what we're trying to do, to create an infrastructure in communities where there are services and supports for young people, and to really individualize it. Who is this young person? What are their needs? And how do we address those needs? And we know how to do that. We really do, because we know what a young person needs, because it's what your child needs or my child needs. They're not any different from our children.
You're running a $4 billion a year agency. It's one of the state's biggest agencies, massive, complex, and it's got a whole bunch of competing interests aside from the kids who you serve. It must be really difficult to have to manage those different competing interests. It's like trying to turn around the Titanic, I would imagine. I'm sure that's probably not the word I should use, but turning around a huge ocean liner and trying to affect change. Has it been frustrating?
Yes, it has been at times, but it's been incredibly rewarding. Change is difficult. You're right, I run a huge agency with very troubled systems. I'm responsible for child welfare, our foster care system. I'm responsible for child care. I'm responsible for juvenile justice. Those are what I call my major buckets. But it's incredibly rewarding to be able to make a difference in the life of a young person.
If you weren't doing this, what would you be doing?
Oh, I still would be. I would be an advocate. Is what I consider myself, an advocate.
Which you started off as. Really.
I started as an advocate, and I will continue to be an advocate for children and families.
But do you get angry?
I get angry, absolutely.
At what?
At how difficult it is to make change, on how the resistance, and sometimes resistance isn't rational at all, and it's not informed by the facts. And I tend to rely on facts and a lot of data, and so it's really frustrating when people don't see that. But it's an opportunity to work with people, to convince them, and to get them to work together collaboratively. I will tell you that there's no one that comes to meet with me that doesn't leave without an assignment. It's so easy to complain. It's very difficult to make change and to sustain change. That's really important, to sustain change.
Do you think that we are now on a path towards change? And I'm not just thinking of New York City or New York State, but around the country. There's a lot of things happening in juvenile justice as well as adult justice as well. But one wonders how long that will last. Right now the mantra is we can be smart on crime, not just tough on crime. But is this just merely convenient politics for the moment? And are we looking at 5 years down the line, another rethink?
I don't think so. I think that we're going to be able, that there has been a shift in public opinion. I think that the economics of this don't make sense, and I think that that has legs, so to speak. The fact that we spend over $250,000 a year to house a young person in a juvenile justice facility, and the cost is exorbitant across the country. This is not just a New York State phenomena. I think that people are understanding better. The research is there. We've learned a lot in the last 10, 15 years about what we're doing that doesn't work, and we're learning more about what works. I think the challenge is to be able to operationalize what works. So I think that there's a change in climate, and I think we're going to be able to sustain that. I don't think that we can do anything other than that, because you know, we're talking about young people, and as a society, we can't afford to throw away these young people and not care about them. They're important to us, and as we age, we're going to need them to support us. So we need to invest in them
You
now.
need to be an optimist. It's not easy to be one, though, is it?
No, it's not. But you know, all I need to do is to talk to a young person. And my faith is renewed. I am re-energized and understand how important this work is.
Mr. Carrión, it's been a pleasure to have you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The way we treat troubled kids is a fundamental test of our entire justice system. If we don't get it right, the problems come back to haunt us later, in public safety, in crowded prisons, in public health. For too many kids, the juvenile justice system is just a stop on the way to a career in the adult system. John Jay has been at the forefront of new research in this vital area. President Jeremy Travis, as I said earlier in the program, led the 2009 Governor's Task Force. Later this month, the Center on Media, Crime, and Justice at John Jay will host a special national conference for journalists who cover juvenile justice. To keep following this issue, please visit our website, The Crime Report, at www.thecrimereport.org. Meanwhile, tell us what you think. Thanks for watching. See you next month.